This is National Educational Television.
Washington University and KETC Channel 9, the St. Louis Educational Television Station, present American Politics, a course for television, with Professor Thomas H. Elliott, Chairman of the Department of Political Science of Washington University.
In the last lecture, we tried to define a political party, largely in terms of its functions, and we tried to identify the reasons why we have a reasonably stable two-party system in this country. Now it's time for another glance at the parties to see if, after all, we can get some idea of what they look like. And here is a rather surprising picture of them. Take a look at just one of these. It doesn't matter which one. We'll call one the Democrats and one the Republicans. In the center is this solid, hard core of party strength, the organization. It's composed of people who are the so-called professional politicians. Some of them hold office, others hope to hold office, and all of them put a large portion of their time and effort into party politics. The next ring represents people, probably their relatives and friends, upon whom they can count when the chips are down and it's time to go to the polls on election day. These people will help to get out the vote. They are the regulars, not in the full-time sense, but very close to the center, the people that can be depended on to help and work for the organization. The third circle, a much bigger one, this one out here, consists of a great number of citizens who certainly don't think of themselves as politicians, but do identify themselves as partisans, either Republicans or Democrats. Sometimes, when they're very stirred up, they help in a campaign. They're fairly conscientious about voting, and they usually can be depended upon to vote largely a straight party ticket. Then we turn to this final and largest outermost ring. That's composed of a great mass of people who may or may not vote, but who, if they do vote, will in all probability vote for the party's candidates. One of the biggest jobs that the professionals have on election day is to get these outermost ring people to the polls. In fact, that's a good deal of what the usual campaign hullabaloo is aimed at, to arouse the interest of these normally partisan, but also normally rather indifferent potential voters. Now, in the nation as a whole, there are millions of people who don't fit into either of these great circles. Those people, all in the empty spaces, are the independents. Independent by preference or conscience, or independents just because they plain don't care. Both parties to win, each party to win, must win a good proportion of the votes of these people in between. So this party tries to appeal to them, and this party tries to appeal to them. And obviously, the appeals must overlap. That's one practical reason why the national party platforms sometimes sound so much alike. Both parties are making a special effort to win the support of the same people. Now let's concentrate on the innermost ring, what I call the hard core, this little black center. And let's see what it looks like, not in the context of the whole party, but by itself. We'll find that it suddenly stops being a ring and rather takes the shape of a very flattened pyramid. I'm talking now about the party organization of either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. Here, across the base of the pyramid and occupying most of it, are countless local organizations. Here, playing comparatively a minor part, are the state organizations, and here at the top is the National Committee. The only trouble about that picture is that usually when you look at a pyramid, you're thinking in terms of a hierarchy. And in a hierarchy, the ultimate power, the ultimate supremacy is at the summit. That is not the case of our national party organizations. Quite the other way around. The real power in the national organization, such as it is, lies down here at the base. And the group at the top, the National Committee, is not in a position of command. Each party's National Committee consists of a man and a woman from each state, and the Republicans have an additional member from the states that have gone Republican, I suppose, as kind of a reward for behaving properly from their standpoint at the polls. The committee men and committee women are elected every 4 years by the state's delegates to the National Nominating Convention, the convention that nominates the candidates for president and vice president. Once chosen, the committee as a whole elects its own chairman, and he ordinarily tries to act, at least to some extent, as the spokesman of the party. With the rise of the nationwide radio and even more with the rise of the nationwide television programs, more and more he is being called upon to act as the spokesman of the party. But we must recall that even so, he is actually only one of several people who might claim that particular position. The fact is that the chairman, like the committee which he heads, has very little control. For instance, in the winter of the congressional year of 1954, Democratic National Chairman Steve Mitchell made a public statement addressed to the voters of 2 congressional districts in California. He told the people in those 2 California districts that they should not nominate for Congress 2 particular individuals. And he gave reasons which seemed compelling to him for the defeat of these 2 aspirants for Democratic nominations. What happened? Despite Mr. Mitchell's command, or rather his very urgent advice, both of these aspirants were promptly and overwhelmingly nominated for Congress by the local Democrats in California, in their California districts. As we shall see, the National Committee does play sometimes a fairly significant part in the arrangements of the quadrennial national nominating conventions. Otherwise, really, they are chiefly propaganda agencies. More and more, they get out printed material and printed propaganda. I have a little of it here. Here is a recent copy of the Republican News issued from the Republican headquarters in Washington. And here is a copy of the monthly Democratic Digest issued also from Washington by the Democratic National Committee. The committee, and particularly the chairman, does try to keep party spirit high, and particularly he tries to stimulate the local organizations. He knows, as well as anybody else, that right there at the base of the pyramid lies the real enduring strength of the party organization. And yet even here, it is very scattered strength. There are thousands of local party organizations, and they have very little or no contact with each other. For instance, the Democratic Central Committee of St. Louis County, Missouri, is hardly in hourly communication with its counterpart, Tammany Hall, the famous Democratic organization of the borough of Manhattan in the city of New York. In fact, national party organization is really most like a very loosely knit federation, with each of the local units being largely independent. In most of the states, state statutes establish the formal pattern of party organization within the state. And yet, though the law may provide for a party committee in each ward or each township or each city or each county, really it's up to individual people always to give life to such a law. In a good many places, therefore, the machine is made of paper, the paper that the law is written on. There just isn't enough daily, hourly interest to make people undertake the unpaid and often thankless burdens of political work. In many other places, a combination of idealism and personal ambition does stimulate a handful of men and women to do active party duties. So few of them, however, that you'd hardly call them a machine. Nevertheless, there are still a good many cities, some of them very large ones, where a real party, old-fashioned party machine does exist and does function today. Let's look for a moment at these still existing party machines. And it doesn't matter whether they're Democratic or Republican. The machine, if we wanted to portray it, I suppose would be another pyramid, a little pyramid, with the precincts at the bottom and the city or county chairman at the top. Only in this pyramid, the real operating power would be, indeed, at the top. Typically, the chairman is the boss, after working his way up from the precinct through the wards to the leadership, the summit. He rules the organization because, typically, the workers in it depend on him for favors and fear his disapproval. We're still a democracy, and he can and sometimes is, or can be, and sometimes is, overthrown. But while he's the boss, he runs the show. And what does he think about? The famous cartoonist Fitzpatrick has given us an amusing picture of the local boss's dream with what he hopes to achieve at night. Seldom can. In a highly organized area, it hasn't been entirely unknown that a unanimous ballot suddenly turns out when the votes are counted. Now, what are the favors of which I spoke, and the fears? These favors and fears which hold the machine together. First, there is the desire of some people for political preferment. As we shall see, a strong local organization can very largely control local party nominations. An ambitious young candidate, therefore, if he's also prudent as well as ambitious, will seek organization support and will certainly, if he possibly can, avoid affronting the leadership and the leader's followers in the party organization. Second, and perhaps more important, there is patronage. In hard times, people want jobs more than anything else. Even in good times, believe it or not, an awful lot of people want jobs. And if they don't want jobs, they at least want better jobs. They want promotions. And there are still others who figure that although everything is going fine right now, affiliation with their local machine is pretty good insurance against the possibility that sometime in the future, hard times may again come knocking at the door. How does the organization get jobs for its loyal members? First, of course, the jobs must be available. That means usually, not by any means always, that the area of public employment, government jobs, is the happy hunting ground for the party machine. Second, however, the machine can't place people in those positions unless it itself has voting power. Its leaders must be able to say to the elected officials who do the appointing, listen, we can re-elect you or we can make it hard for you next time because we have the votes. All our people will go to the polls, and not only all our people that you see out working, but all their fathers and mothers and sons and daughters and sisters and brothers and uncles and aunts and nieces and nephews. They'll all go to the polls. And so you'd better listen to us. You know, the vengeance of a disappointed party worker that he would like to wreak, and sometimes is able to wreak, on an appointed official for whom he has worked in an election, and who then seems to forget him when the time for making the appointments come around, can be pretty vehement, pretty violent. I came across a set of verses in a little local paper in a big city in the East some years ago, which were, according to the paper, reprinted by request. I don't know who wrote these, and I'm not by any means going to read them all. It goes on for quite a long time, but I'll read just a couple of these verses concerning the very subject which I just spoke. I'll try to do it despite the brogue, which doesn't come as naturally to me as it might if I My ancestors had come from Ireland. You're looking well, Mulcahy, and mighty prosperous, too. Things came your way, election day. It's pretty soft for you. But wait a minute till I'm through. There's one thing I can't see. Just where do I come in at? Where's the job you promised me? I polled the ward, got out the vote. Just get that in your dome. I scraped the precincts through and through, just like a fine-tooth comb. I hardly saw me home at all. And oh, that's no idle whine. You got yours, Mulcahy. When do I get mine? It may be idle gossip, but the talk is traveling around. 'Tis whispered to me gently that you're gonna throw me down. Now, I'm not insinuating, but be that as it may, I'll warn you now to watch your step. That's all I've got to say. It's up to you to come across. Make good your word, that's all. But something's going to happen when the vote comes out next fall. There'll be an upset in the ward that'll dislocate your spine. You got yours, Mulcahy. When do I get mine? That's an illustration, I think, not too far from life, as any practicing politician in a big city knows, of the feelings that you have to cope with if you are involved in machine politics. The other favors bestowed aside from jobs and patronage, bestowed by a local boss, are likely to be more strictly personal and social. After all, some of the great city machines really got their foothold in the eastern seaboard cities during the period when, in the last century, when great shiploads of immigrants were coming in 3 or 4 ships a day from Europe. The good party machine men would be right there at the pier to meet these poor and frightened foreigners coming out of steerage, to guide them to a place where they could find a place to lay their heads, where they could get food, where they could keep warm, where probably they could find work. And those immigrants and their sons and daughters were forever faithful, forever grateful, and therefore faithful to that organization. More recently, sometimes, in not too long past, the favor has been such things as a ton of coal for the residents of a shivering tenement. There was a boss in the 20s in Philadelphia who used to send out hundreds of turkeys to poor people on Thanksgiving Day. He also sent out turkeys to a large number of the members of the police force, but that's a slightly different story. It does lead to the next kind of favor that I might mention, as one which is altogether too familiar to a lot of people, little things like the fixing of a parking ticket. Also, in some areas, pretty important favor, furnishing bail when a man is in trouble with the law. The machine also used to play a very significant part in the social life of a crowded city community. Al Smith used to write about the great day when he was a boy, the great day each year, which was when the ward or the Assembly District organization of Tammany Hall took all of the residents of his area out on the Hudson River day boat for an outing on the river. The local party headquarters was the place where men and women met for social life. The fears that I mentioned, I think, are merely the obverse of the favors. The ambitious politician fears being thwarted. The insecure worker fears unemployment. The humble family fears social disapproval. When the machine is both powerful and ruthless, of course, there are other people who may fear it, and fear it plenty too. For instance, a local businessman, perhaps an honest businessman, who affronts the boss. He may be seriously harassed. They used to tell a story about the days when Ed Crump was the complete boss of the city of Memphis, Tennessee. It was said there, for instance, and it was one of numerous examples, an undertaker defied him. And the undertaker was nearly, if not quite, driven out of business, because for days and weeks thereafter, every funeral which he conducted, the funeral procession was stopped by police, claiming quite falsely that the drivers were going too fast or that the brakes on the hearse needed to be inspected, breaking up the funeral and pretty well destroying that defiant undertaker's business. This could be done, of course, only where the machine really was in control of the city government. And that brings us to the familiar charge that political machines are corrupt, and corrupt especially in the big cities? Well, some have been, and certainly all can be. In the underworld, in the gambling industry, vast sums of money are involved, and the possibilities of blackmail, or if you want to call it that, protection, are obvious. Sometimes a party organization becomes deeply involved in such dark matters. But this is not particularly a sin of political machines as such. Any government official, powerful one or even a lowly cop, if he's dishonest, if his bent is that way, can indulge in profitable crookedness until he's caught. And he can do this whether there is a machine, a party organization in the city, and whether he's a machine man or not. In other words, the existence of the machine doesn't necessarily imply the existence of crookedness, or vice versa. A machine does not have to be, and is not always, corrupt in this sense. However, what about the legitimate machine? Doesn't it, some people say, actually corrupt our politics through its perfectly legal program of patronage and favors? Nothing dishonest or illegal about it, but isn't this a corrupting influence in our political life, too? Well, patronage can certainly be bad when it leads to the filling of important positions, or any positions, with unqualified people. And yet, if you think that parties are important, and a good many people think that a strong two-party system is vital to democracy in this country, how are you going to keep your party organization together if you have no jobs at all to hand out to the faithful? More especially, how is a responsible official, a policy-making official, going to be able to administer affairs the way he would like and the way he's been elected to do if he cannot appoint the people who agree with him? In other words, the people of his own party. That's patronage, I suppose. You can go way back on that for a remark by a responsible official which seems to endorse, to some extent at least, this principle of patronage. I quote from a president of the United States: "I shall not, while I have the honor to administer the government, bring a man into any office of consequence knowingly, whose political tenets are adverse to the measures which the general government is pursuing. For this, in my opinion, would be little better than political suicide." Let me repeat that without any change in meaning, but with a slight change in wording, to use the wording of the present day instead of his day. "I shall not, while I have the honor to administer the government, bring a man into any office of consequence, knowingly, whose political views are opposed to the policies of my administration. For this, in my opinion, would be little better than political suicide." That remark was made by a man we like to look up to, first President of the United States, Honorable George Washington. Favors for party workers seem wrong, too. They smack of buying votes. But perhaps there's another side to this picture also. People who receive the favors need help. The party organization serves as a welfare agency. What's wrong with trying to alleviate human suffering? Ah, but you say the organization only helps the party workers. It isn't really a welfare organization. It ignores the other people who may be in need. Often that's true, but it's not always true. That isn't always the case. Quite often, politicians, political bosses, local leaders have looked upon themselves to a very considerable degree as humanitarians and have tried to help practically anybody that's come to them for help. Hoping, of course, that gratitude will be shown for these favors received on election day, but doing little or nothing to compel the showing of such gratitude. Today, the local party organization that I've been talking about, the organization as we've known it for about 100 years, the basis of our familiar national party structure, may be on the way out. In early 1956, there was published a novel which tells us in part why the old model may be changing. It's a book that I have here called The Last Hurrah, The Last Hurrah, and it concerns the last half century of organization politics in Boston, Massachusetts. Here is a graphic picture of the old-style boss losing his grip, even though he is just as eloquent, vigorous, cynical, and ruthless as he ever was. Why? What's happened to his machine? What is happening to local party machines all over the country? Well, first, civil service examinations slowly supplant patronage in the filling of more and more public positions. Second, needy people, far more than in the past, can look to the government rather than the boss for most of the help that they want. The welfare state, so-called, has taken over a vital part of the old machine's stock in trade. Quite naturally, the boss in this book, The Last Hurrah, reserves his almost his only emotional outbursts of hatred for the ghost of Franklin D. Roosevelt. For Franklin D. Roosevelt, though he used the city machines in his rise and his maintaining of political power, at the same time initiated policies, or supported policies, which may have meant the beginning of the end for the old familiar ward and city party organization. Third, television, the climax of a long development, beginning, I suppose, about the time that Henry Ford first brought out a really cheap car. A development which has continually been changing our overall social patterns. No longer do humble city folk depend on the local party headquarters to furnish entertainment and outings and clam bakes and a natural meeting place. Now with television, fewer and fewer will even turn out for a political meeting. It's easier to stay at home and watch the show in your own living room. The machine as a social society is rapidly fading away. What will this mean to our national party system? I don't know. I do know that old-style party organizations, despite these handicaps, still operate in numerous important places. I do believe, too, that in a democracy, the human factors, personal recognition, personal favors, above all, personal concern, will always be significant in politics. But as the old familiar foundations of party organization crumble, will the organizations themselves slowly die out? And if so, what is going to replace them? The national party pyramid that we talked about a few minutes ago will be based on what? Remember those circles that I drew, or that were up there and we looked at as picturing the whole party structure? If the core atrophies, will the whole sphere simply fly apart? I don't suppose we have to answer these questions now, but they do suggest that any description of party politics 20 years hence may be very different from what I have tried to describe today.
American Politics is presented by Washington University and KETC Channel 9, the St. Louis Educational Television Station and Production Center.
This is National Educational Television.